Hey, this is Bronson Strickland, again with the MSU Deer Lab, and if you remember a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, Marcus Lashley and I came out to this very timber stand and we were introducing a concept called the basketball technique. And the whole purpose of that was demonstrating that what you need for some developed cover, specifically for where is a fawn going to be able to hide. And so we threw the basketball behind us to demonstrate that you couldn't find it, you couldn't see it. And this is about the size of a fawn, and it was just to show
the color too.
And it's about the same color too, yeah. What's interesting, or why we're doing this follow-up, is that since that point, which it had a beautifully developed understory at that time, this stand, it had been thinned recently and the understory had responded, and it was just optimal at that point for providing a lot of cover but also a lot of food. And Marcus, since that point, there has been no fire introduced into the stand, and we noticed that plant succession has happened, and we have moved from an herbaceous understory to now we're seeing a woody understory growing into the midstory.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, this should resonate with people. I know we get plenty of feedback where maybe you're limited or you haven't quite gotten comfortable using fire yet, and a lot of people are using thinning to get a lot of sunlight in, and you get that boost like we showed you for a few years, and then you need to follow that up to perpetuate that into the future, and that didn't happen here, and I think that is pretty common on the landscape. Now, like you said, when we look at that, if he throws that basketball in there, we're still not going to be able to find it.
Yeah, it's gone.
The hiding structure is still fine. The problem is, if you remember that last video, if you don't, go back and watch it real fast. We identified a number of really high quality forage plants in there. So the difference now in this structure, not only is a large portion of the biomass has it moved out of the reach of deer where the lactating female, which is really nutritionally stressed, she now can't forage in there on a lot of it because she can't reach it, and what she can reach is by far much lower quality and probably a lot lower biomass if you actually start measuring it. So she can still hide a fawn in it, but now she has to get up and go somewhere else to feed the fawn, which is not desirable. You would rather them be paired together. In the previous video, we had done a pretty good job of that. And if you let that go on 4, 5, 6 more years, that goes away, even though they can still hide in that find. Yeah. Now we're stressing her more potentially. And I don't know if you saw it, but what you guys have probably noticed, we didn't go back in there to where we were for a couple of reasons. One, it's hot. Two, really, this is one tick infested place right here. And I know there are people out there that have been concerned about that because I get emailed about it, and I know that you do too. Right. Where you see fawns with a lot of ticks on them and deer, and I'm not saying they're necessarily getting it because of this, but I know one thing: I don't want to go in there because I've already gotten ticks on me on the edge of it.
And we know one good remedy for that. I mean, research has shown, your research has shown that one thing you can do is fire, and specifically fire during the growing season. Yeah,
so we've talked a lot about that. If you had come back in here with repeated fire, we could keep that vegetation, you know, down in this level, and we're burning about, you know, once it gets up above your waist, you're thinking about burning again, and we are keeping that structure. The majority of the biomass is now in the reach of deer. You tend to have a whole bunch of high quality plants associated with it. With the more sun, notice a lot of sun is getting blocked out before it hits the ground here by things in the mid-story. And then an added benefit, especially with a growing season fire, is you reduce some of those noxious pests that we don't want around, and the deer doesn't either.
Right. So I think another thing to point out, Marcus, is that several years ago, this stand was providing cover as well as a lot of good food. We've transitioned now into it's only providing cover, and there's all the negative issues that you just spoke about. But if there's still no disturbance with the stand, another 5 years from now, it's not even going to provide cover.
Yeah.
So
But it
disturbance
still
is critical.
will provide all those noxious pests.
It'll still do that, but all of these tree species, once they start capturing all of the sunlight in the mid-story, then we're not going to have anything on the forest floor.
And to be honest, Bronson, we're kind of getting in the stage now where we're going to have a hard time even top killing a lot of the plants and even getting fire to carry. So we're sort of on that pivot point where fire, starts to become less of an option to clean this up, and you start having to get into more aggressive, more expensive treatments to set it back again.
Right. Yep. So I guess the moral of the story is plant succession does happen, and you can see from the previous video to now how this stand has changed because there was no disturbance event to keep the understory in an herbaceous plant community. And so that's always going to be critical, thinking about your deer management, thinking about on your property where you're putting, intentionally putting food, where you're putting cover. As always, keep this in mind, is that every year it changes a little bit. But if you walk away from it from 5 years and come back, it can be drastically different, and deer use is going to change.
Mm-hmm.